The night was supposed to be an ordinary one. Nicole had insisted on hosting another one of her get-togethers with her so-called friends. These gatherings had become more frequent lately, filled with laughter that didn't quite reach me, conversations I wasn't part of, and glances that carried more than they let on. Still, I played my role, the quiet, accommodating husband who didn't rock the boat. But that night was different. I should have seen it coming. Nicole had been distant for weeks, her laughter louder with her friends and colder when we were alone. Evan, her coworker, was there again. He'd started showing up at these gatherings more often, always lingering too close to Nicole, speaking just a little too softly when he leaned in to whisper something to her. I told myself I was imagining things, that no one would be so bold as to flaunt their disrespect right in front of me. But the truth was undeniable when it unfolded before my eyes. The evening began innocently enough. Nicole flitted between the kitchen and the living room, laughing with her friends, pouring drinks, and basking in the attention she always seemed to crave. I stayed in the background, refilling snack bowls and answering small talk questions from people who barely remembered my name. Evan was seated in the center of the room, holding court like he owned the place. His charm oozed with arrogance, and the others seemed captivated by his every word. Nicole was right next to him, her hand resting too casually on his arm, her laugh too bright at his every joke. I felt like an outsider in my own home. It happened in the middle of one of Evan's stories, some exaggerated tale about his recent adventure abroad. The group was in stitches, their laughter echoing off the walls. I was standing near the doorway, watching the scene with a tight smile, when Nicole's voice cut through the noise. "Adrian," she called, her tone dripping with mock sweetness. "Why don't you come join us? Or are you too busy sulking over there?" Her words drew the room's attention. I felt every pair of eyes turn to me, felt the weight of their smirks and barely hidden amusement. "I'm fine," I said calmly, forcing the smile to stay on my face. But Nicole wasn't done. She stood, holding a pitcher of water in her hand. "Oh, come on. Lighten up. Here, let me help you cool off." Before I could react, she tipped the pitcher forward, and the cold water poured over my head. The room erupted in laughter. Evans was the loudest, his smirk spreading as he leaned back in his seat, clearly enjoying the show. Nicole's friends joined in, their voices blending into a cacophony of ridicule. I stood there, drenched and humiliated, my clothes sticking to my skin, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. My heart pounded, not with anger but with something deeper, colder. Nicole looked at me with triumph in her eyes, as if she'd won some unspoken game. "Oh, come on, Adrian," she said, her voice dripping with false innocence. "It's just a joke. Don't be such a buzzkill." I didn't respond. I didn't give her or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I straightened my back, locked eyes with Nicole, and walked out of the room without saying a word. As I stepped into the quiet of the kitchen, away from their laughter, I felt a strange sense of clarity settle over me. This wasn't about the water. It wasn't about the laughter or the humiliation. This was about respect, about how little she thought of me, how easily she dismissed me in front of her lover and friends. I grabbed a towel and dried my face, staring at my reflection in the dark window above the sink. This ends tonight, I thought to myself. The laughter from the living room continued, but it sounded distant now, like a storm moving further away. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was calm, calculated. Nicole thought she'd humiliated me, thought she'd put me in my place. But she had no idea what I was capable of when pushed too far. That night, I vowed to make her see just how wrong she was. The first move had been hers, but the game was far from over. I spent the rest of the evening in the solitude of the guest room, listening to the muffled laughter echoing from the living room. It wasn't the kind of laughter that came from genuine joy. It was the kind of laughter that fed on someone else's humiliation. My humiliation. Nicole's voice rose above the rest, playful, teasing, always loud enough to let me know I was still the topic of their amusement. Evan's laugh followed close behind, deep and smug, as if he'd just scored another victory at my expense. I clenched my fists, staring at the bare wall in front of me. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd retreat quietly, accept their mockery, and go on pretending everything was fine. But they didn't know me as well as they thought. The morning after, the house was eerily quiet. Nicole's friends had left sometime in the early hours, and the place carried the faint scent of stale alcohol and regret. Or maybe that was just me projecting. Nicole was still asleep, her arrogance resting as peacefully as she had. I, however, had spent the night staring at the ceiling, piecing together everything I'd ignored for too long. This wasn't just about last night. It wasn't just about the water or the laughter. It was about a pattern, a gradual erosion of respect, trust, and love. Nicole's actions didn't happen in isolation, and her circle of friends had played a role in enabling her. There was Lila, her best friend since college, the self-appointed queen of their little group. She was the one who always encouraged Nicole to live a little, to put herself first. Lila had been there every step of the way, whispering in Nicole's ear, stoking her ego, and fueling her disdain for me. Then there was Mark, the quiet one in the group. He wasn't as vocal as Lila or as smug as Evan, but his silence spoke volumes. Mark was the type to avoid conflict, to laugh along even when he didn't find the joke funny. I'd caught him glancing at me a few times during their gatherings, his expression betraying a hint of discomfort. But he never spoke up, and that made him just as complicit. And finally, Evan, the root of it all. He was the kind of man who thrived on control, who walked into a room and immediately sought out the person he could dominate. He charmed his way into Nicole's life, planting seeds of dissatisfaction and convincing her that he could offer her something I couldn't. As I stood in the kitchen, making a pot of coffee, Nicole walked in. She didn't look embarrassed or remorseful. If anything, she looked smug, her lips curling into a faint smile as she reached for a mug. "Morning," she said casually, as if last night had been nothing more than a funny little prank. I didn't respond. I poured my coffee, set the pot back down, and turned to leave. "Oh, come on, Adrian," she called after me. "You're not still mad about last night, are you? It was just a joke. You've got to learn to laugh at yourself." I stopped in the doorway, my back to her. "Funny," I said, my voice steady. "I don't remember laughing." Her smirk faltered, but I didn't stick around to see her reaction. That day, I started laying the groundwork. I knew I couldn't confront Nicole directly, not yet. People like her and her circle thrived on deflection, on twisting the narrative to make themselves the victims. If I wanted to reclaim my dignity, I had to be smart about it. I reached out to Sam, an old friend who worked as a paramedic. Sam had always been good at keeping a level head, even in the most chaotic situations. If anyone could help me think clearly, it was him. "She poured water on you? In front of her lover and friends?" Sam asked, incredulous. "Yep," I said, sipping my coffee. "And you didn't lose it?" "No," I replied. "I don't want to lose it, Sam. I want to take it back." Sam let out a low whistle. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you need." By the time I hung up the phone, I had a plan. Nicole, Evan, Lila, and the rest of them thought they could humiliate me and walk away unscathed. They thought I'd stay in the background, licking my wounds while they carried on with their lives. But they were wrong. I wasn't just going to take back my dignity, I was going to take back control. And when I was done, they'd finally understand what it meant to cross me. The first move was theirs, but now it was my turn. I spent the day walking through the echoes of last night's humiliation, each memory replaying in my mind like a broken record. The laughter, the cold splash of water, the smug look on Nicole's face. It all lingered, clawing at the edges of my sanity. But instead of anger, I felt a strange, detached calm. Anger would have been too easy, too predictable. Nicole and her friends expected me to lash out, to let my emotions get the better of me. That's what people like them thrived on, watching others lose control. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. No, I had other plans. That afternoon, while Nicole was out, likely with Evan, I sat in the quiet of the kitchen, staring at the coffee mug in my hands. The silence was heavy but not oppressive. It was the kind of silence that lets you think clearly, that sharpens your focus and steadies your resolve. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Sam. Sam had always been a straight shooter, The kind of guy who could see through any situation and offer clarity. I hadn't seen him much since Nicole started pulling me away from my old life, but I knew I could count on him now. "Adrian," he said when he picked up. "Long time, man. What's up?" I hesitated for a moment, the words catching in my throat. But then I remembered the laughter, the water dripping down my face, and Nicole's voice mocking me in front of her lover. "I need your help," I said finally. We met later that evening at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one cared to eavesdrop. Sam was already there when I arrived, his paramedic uniform a stark contrast to the casual diners around him. "You look like hell," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. "Feel like it too," I replied, forcing a smile. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "All right, tell me what's going on." I told him everything, Nicole's affair, Evan's smug arrogance, the friends who had laughed at my humiliation. By the time I finished, Sam was shaking his head, his jaw tight with anger on my behalf. "Damn," he said. "That's low, even for her." "It's not just her," I said. "It's all of them. Lila, Mark, Evan. They've been feeding off this for months. I was too blind to see it, but now—" I trailed off, my fists clenching on the table. Sam nodded slowly. "You want payback." "I want justice," I corrected him. "I want them to feel the weight of what they've done. I want them to understand that they can't just walk all over people and expect no consequences." Sam leaned back, crossing his arms. "All right. So, what's the plan?" That was the moment the fog lifted. For weeks, I'd been living in a haze, going through the motions while Nicole and her friends slowly dismantled my dignity. But now, with Sam's unwavering support, I could see clearly. We spent the next 2 hours laying the groundwork, brainstorming ways to expose Nicole and her circle for what they really were. Sam's experience as a paramedic proved invaluable. His knowledge of emergency protocols and his network of contacts opened doors I hadn't considered. "I'll need to keep things subtle," I said, sketching out a rough plan on a napkin. "If I confront them head-on, they'll just turn it around on me. I need to make them unravel on their own." Sam nodded, a sly grin spreading across his face. "You're thinking long-term. I like it." By the time we left the cafe, I felt lighter, more in control than I had in weeks. Nicole thought she could humiliate me, that I'd sit quietly and let her have her way. But she had underestimated me. This wasn't just about last night. This was about every moment she had chipped away at my self-respect, every time she'd chosen her ego over our marriage. Nicole, Evan, and their little circle of enablers thought they were untouchable. They thought they could laugh at me and walk away unscathed. But the game was just beginning, and this time, the rules were mine to set. It's strange how the smallest details can escape you when you're too close to a situation. For months, I had been living in the shadow of Nicole's deceit, oblivious to the signs that now seemed so obvious. But with Sam's help, I began peeling back the layers of her betrayal, uncovering truths that were darker than I'd imagined. Nicole wasn't just unfaithful, she was calculated. Every laugh at my expense, every flirtatious glance at Evan, every snide comment she made about me in front of her friends was part of a larger pattern. She didn't just fall into an affair. She engineered it, feeding off the validation her little circle gave her. And they, in turn, thrived on her drama, like moths drawn to a flame. It was time to extinguish that flame. I started by retracing her steps, paying attention to the details I'd ignored for so long. Nicole had grown careless, as people often do when they think they're untouchable. Her phone buzzed with notifications she didn't bother hiding anymore. Her schedule was littered with work meetings that conveniently aligned with Evan's absences, and her spending habits had shifted dramatically. Expensive dinners, new clothes, even jewelry she'd never worn at home. But it wasn't enough to confirm what I already knew. I needed proof. Sam introduced me to a contact of his, a private investigator named Ray. Ray was the kind of guy you wouldn't notice in a crowd, quiet, unassuming, but razor-sharp. "You're looking for something specific, or just the general dirt?" Ray asked when we met at his office. "Both," I replied. "I want to know exactly how deep this goes. Who's involved, where they meet, how long it's been happening, everything." Ray nodded, his face expressionless. Give me a week. While Ray worked, I turned my attention to Nicole's circle of friends. They weren't just bystanders. They were accomplices, actively encouraging her behavior. Lila, her so-called best friend, was the worst of them all. Lila had always been loud, opinionated, and unapologetically self-centered. She thrived on drama, often creating it where none existed. She had been the one to introduce Nicole to Evan at a party months ago, planting the seed of their affair. Then there was Mark. He was quieter, less abrasive than Lila, but no less complicit. Mark was the kind of man who avoided confrontation at all costs, even if it meant enabling terrible behavior. He was always there, laughing along, offering half-hearted reassurances when things got too heated. And finally, Evan, the man at the center of it all. He wasn't just arrogant. He was dangerous. Evan had a reputation for being manipulative, using people as stepping stones to get what he wanted. Nicole wasn't his first affair, and I doubted she'd be his last. When Ray finally called, his findings were worse than I'd expected. "Your wife's been seeing Evan for almost a year," he said, his voice matter of fact. "They meet at his place, mostly. Sometimes at hotels. She's also been spending money on him. Gifts, dinners, even covering his rent a couple of times." My stomach turned, but I kept my voice steady. "What else?" "Evan's not clean," Ray continued. "He's involved in some shady business deals, fraud, mostly. I've got copies of emails, bank transactions, even a couple of phone recordings. If this blows up, he's looking at serious jail time." A dark satisfaction settled over me. Evan thought he was untouchable, but he'd left a trail. And Nicole, blinded by her infatuation, had tied herself to his sinking ship. That night, I sat in my kitchen, going over Ray's findings. The evidence was damning. Text messages, photos, financial records, all neatly organized in a folder. I thought about confronting Nicole then and there, throwing the evidence in her face and watching her squirm. But that would be too easy. She'd deny it, twist it, turn it back on me. No, I needed to be smarter. This wasn't just about exposing Nicole and Evan. It was about dismantling the entire illusion they'd built. Lila, Mark, and the rest of their circle needed to see the truth, too. They needed to understand the cost of their arrogance. I called Sam, my voice calm but firm. "It's worse than I thought," I said. "I figured as much," he replied. "What's the next move?" "We're going to let them hang themselves," I said. "Step by step. By the time we're done, they'll have no one left to blame but themselves." Sam chuckled, a low, knowing sound. "Now we're talking." As I hung up the phone, I felt the first stirrings of control returning to my life. Nicole thought she'd won, that her actions would have no consequences. But she was wrong. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Sitting in my kitchen late that night, surrounded by the evidence Ray had uncovered, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: power. Nicole, Evan, and their little circle of enablers thought they were untouchable. They thought they could humiliate me, strip me of my dignity, and carry on with their lives as if nothing had happened. But they underestimated me. I wasn't going to confront them in anger or desperation. That would give them exactly what they wanted: a chance to dismiss me, to twist the narrative and make themselves the victims. No, I needed to be calculated, precise. It was time to set my plan into motion. The first step was to use what I'd learned about Evan. His shady business deals and fraudulent activities were a ticking time bomb, and I was more than happy to light the fuse. I gathered the most damning pieces of evidence Ray had provided: emails, bank statements, and recorded calls, and compiled them into a neat, anonymous package. Sam helped me craft the perfect narrative to accompany the evidence. "It has to look like a whistleblower's tip," he said, sipping his coffee. "Someone on the inside who got fed up with Evan's games." Together, we sent the package to a local journalist known for exposing white-collar criminals. Megan was sharp, relentless, and had a knack for turning whispers into front-page scandals. I knew she'd sink her teeth into Evan's story and wouldn't let go until the whole city knew his name. The next step was more personal. Nicole and her friends thrived on appearances, on their carefully curated image of superiority and success. I wanted to shatter that image, piece by piece. I started with Lila. She was the queen bee of their group, the one who pulled the strings and kept the drama alive. I knew from Ray's investigation that Lila had her own skeletons, questionable financial dealings, an affair with a married man, and a habit of using her friends for personal gain. Through an anonymous email, I fed snippets of her indiscretions to a few of her colleagues. The gossip spread like wildfire, and within days, Lila's reputation at work was in tatters. Next was Mark. He wasn't as active in the group's antics, but his silence made him complicit. Mark had a drinking problem he kept hidden from most people, but I'd seen it firsthand at Nicole's parties. I didn't have to do much, just a gentle nudge to his boss, mentioning my concern for Mark's well-being. Within a week, Mark was pulled aside at work and offered mandatory counseling. It wasn't malicious, but it sent a clear message. Silence has consequences. While the seeds of chaos took root among Nicole's friends, I began laying the groundwork for my confrontation with her and Evan. I wasn't going to ambush them in private. That would be too easy to ignore. Instead, I planned to confront them in front of their friends, the same people who had laughed at me, mocked me, and supported their betrayal. Sam and I coordinated every detail. He agreed to play a key role, not just as my moral support, but as someone who could escalate the situation if necessary. His connections as a paramedic gave us an edge. He knew exactly how to make a scene look bigger than it was, to draw attention to the right people at the right time. "Are you sure you want to do this publicly?" Sam asked one night as we reviewed the plan. "They humiliated me in front of everyone," I replied. "They don't deserve the courtesy of a private reckoning." Sam nodded, his expression firm. "Then let's make sure they never forget it." The final piece of the puzzle was timing. Nicole and her friends were planning another gathering in 2 weeks, a casual dinner party at Evan's apartment. It was the perfect setting, intimate enough to keep things contained but public enough to make their humiliation unforgettable. I spent the days leading up to the party fine-tuning every detail, ensuring no loose ends could come back to haunt me. The evidence was ready, the anonymous tips were spreading, and Megan's article on Evan was nearly finished. By the time the party rolled around, everything was in place. Nicole and Evan thought they'd broken me, but they had no idea what was coming. As I stood in front of the mirror that evening, adjusting my tie, I felt a strange sense of calm. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my power. Nicole wanted to play games. Now it was my turn to show her how they're really played. The days leading up to the party felt like a calm before the storm. Everything was in place. The evidence, the whispers spreading through their social circles, and the looming article Megan was preparing about Evan's fraudulent activities. The groundwork was solid. All I had to do now was wait. But waiting wasn't as easy as I'd imagined. Each day felt heavier, each passing hour a reminder of what was coming. My mind replayed the humiliation I had endured, Nicole's cold laughter, the smug arrogance on Evan's face, and the way her friends had cheered them on. The memory stoked the fire inside me, sharpening my focus, keeping me resolute. Nicole, oblivious as ever, carried on with her life as though nothing had changed. She still smiled when Evan called, still met with her friends to gossip and laugh, and still acted like I was an afterthought. I let her think she had one. For now, 2 days before the party, I overheard Nicole on the phone with Lila. She was in the kitchen, her voice animated, almost giddy. "Evan's really pulling out all the stops for Saturday," she said, her tone light and carefree. "It's going to be perfect. Just wait until you see what he's planned." My stomach tightened, but I kept my face neutral as I walked past her. "What about Adrian?" Lila asked through the speaker. "Is he coming?" Nicole laughed, a sound that grated against my nerves. "Oh, please. He wouldn't dare show up. He knows his place by now." I felt the corner of my mouth twitch, but I said nothing. I poured myself a glass of water and walked out of the room, her laughter trailing behind me. That night, I met with Sam at his place. We reviewed the plan one last time, going over every detail to make sure nothing could go wrong. "Are you ready for this?" Sam asked, his expression serious. I nodded. "I've been ready since the moment she poured that water on me." Sam smirked. "Good. Because once this starts, there's no turning back." The day of the party arrived, and I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The chaos I had orchestrated was already in motion, rippling through their lives in ways they hadn't even realized yet. Megan's article was set to go live that evening, perfectly timed to coincide with the gathering. I dressed carefully, choosing a suit that was sharp but understated. I wanted to look composed, confident, a stark contrast to the man they had laughed at weeks ago. When Nicole saw me getting ready, her expression shifted to one of surprise. "What's the occasion?" she asked, her tone laced with suspicion. "Just heading out," I replied casually, adjusting my tie in the mirror. She tilted her head, studying me. "You're not going to Evans, are you?" I turned to face her, meeting her gaze head-on. "Why wouldn't I?" Her lips parted slightly, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You weren't invited," she said finally, her voice faltering just a little. I smiled, a calm, measured expression. "I don't need an invitation, Nicole. It's my life they've been laughing at, after all. I think it's only fair I join in on the fun." She didn't say anything, but the look on her face was enough. For the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The party was in full swing by the time I arrived. Laughter and music spilled out of Evan's apartment, a cacophony of arrogance and self-satisfaction. I stood outside the door for a moment, letting the sounds wash over me. When I stepped inside, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, and I met each gaze with calm indifference. Nicole was standing near the bar with Evan, her face pale, her drink frozen halfway to her lips. "Adrian," Evan said, recovering quickly. His smirk returned, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Didn't think you'd show up?" "Why wouldn't I?" I replied, my tone cool. "After all, I wouldn't want to miss the chance to toast to your success." Evan's smirk faltered just slightly, but he covered it with a chuckle. Nicole, meanwhile, was staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. I scanned the room, taking in the familiar faces of her friends, Lila, Mark, and the others who had laughed at my humiliation. I felt the weight of their eyes on me, their unease growing with each passing second. "Shall we get started?" I asked, raising my glass in a mock toast. They didn't know it yet, but the storm was about to hit, and this time, they wouldn't be laughing. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. As I stood there, glass in hand, I felt every eye on me, confused, skeptical, some even nervous. Evan was the first to recover, flashing that arrogant smirk he always wore like armor. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, his voice oozing fake charm. "Glad you could join us, Adrian, though I can't help but wonder why." I smiled back at him, calm and composed. "Why wouldn't I come? After all, you've all been so invested in my life lately." It felt rude to not return the favor. A ripple of unease passed through the group, though some tried to laugh it off. Nicole, however, wasn't laughing. She stood by the bar, her drink clutched tightly in her hand, her face pale. "Adrian," she began, her voice hesitant, "I don't think this is the right time or place." "Oh, I disagree." I cut her off, my tone sharp but controlled. "This is the perfect time and place." I stepped further into the room, my eyes scanning the familiar faces of her friends, Lila, Mark, and a few others whose names didn't matter. They were all complicit, their laughter and silence feeding into the betrayal that had festered in my own home. "Let's start with some introductions, shall we?" I said, setting my glass down on the nearest table. "Most of you already know me as Nicole's husband, the man you've all been laughing at behind his back, or, more recently, to his face." A nervous chuckle escaped from Lila, but she quickly stopped when I turned my gaze on her. "And you," I said, pointing at her, "have been her biggest cheerleader, haven't you, Lila?" Encouraging her every step of the way, whispering in her ear about how much better her life would be without me. Lila opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand to silence her. "Don't worry, we'll get to you later." I turned my attention to Evan, who leaned casually against the back of a chair, still smirking. "And then there's you," I said, my voice cold. "The man who thought he could waltz into my life, take what wasn't his, and get away with it." Evan shrugged, his smirk widening. "It's not my fault she chose me." His words were like gasoline on a fire, but I didn't let them ignite me. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folder, holding it up for everyone to see. You might want to rethink that confidence, Evan, I said, because this folder contains everything I need to destroy you. Bank records, fraudulent transactions, even emails detailing your little business ventures. The room fell silent. Evan's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. What the hell are you talking about? He asked, his voice suddenly defensive. I opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents, laying them on the coffee table for everyone to see. I'm talking about the people you've conned, the businesses you've defrauded, and the lies you've told to keep up this charade. Nicole stepped forward, her voice shaking. Adrian, stop. This isn't the place for. Why not? I snapped, turning to face her. You didn't seem to mind humiliating me in front of these people. Why should I extend you any courtesy now? She froze, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for a response. The final blow came when Sam, who had been waiting outside, entered the room with perfect timing. Dressed in his paramedic uniform, he carried a clipboard and looked every bit the professional. Sorry to interrupt, he said, his tone calm, but I believe you're Evan Carter? Evan's face drained of color. What's this about? Sam held up the clipboard. You've been reported for financial fraud and endangerment. Authorities have been alerted, and I'm here to ensure the situation is handled properly. The room erupted into chaos. Nicole turned to Evan, her voice panicked. What is he talking about? Evan, is this true? Evan stammered, his confidence crumbling. I don't know what he's talking about. This is a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was the truth, and it was all laid bare for everyone to see. As the chaos unfolded, I stood back and watched, my heart steady. Lila tried to defend Evan. Mark looked like he wanted to sink into the floor, and Nicole, she just stood there, tears streaming down her face, her world unraveling before her eyes. When Evan was finally escorted out, the room fell silent again. Nicole turned to me, her voice trembling. Adrian, I didn't know. I didn't. I looked at her, my expression unreadable. You chose him, Nicole. You chose all of this. And now, you get to live with it. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving them to deal with the wreckage they had created. This time, the laughter was gone, and for the first time in months, I felt free. As I walked out of Evan's apartment, leaving behind the chaos I'd orchestrated, I felt the weight of their panic trailing me. The echo of Nicole's voice, trembling with disbelief, still rang in my ears. Adrian, I didn't know. I didn't. But she did know. Maybe not the full scope of Evan's crimes, but she knew enough. She knew she was betraying me, knew she was choosing her own selfish desires over our marriage. And now, as the facade she built came crashing down, I couldn't bring myself to care about her excuses. The truth had been laid bare. The humiliation she and her friends had heaped on me was now theirs to endure. But I wasn't done yet. By the time I got home, Sam was waiting for me, leaning casually against his car in the driveway. His paramedic uniform was slightly rumpled, but his grin was sharp and intact. How'd it go? He asked as I approached. Perfect, I replied, unlocking the door and gesturing for him to come inside. Evan cracked like an egg. Nicole and her friends? They're reeling. Sam chuckled, following me into the house. Good. They deserve every second of it. We sat at the dining table, a bottle of whiskey between us. As I poured us each a glass, I couldn't help but replay the night's events in my mind. The look on Evan's face when I laid out the evidence, the panic in Nicole's eyes when she realized how deep she was in. It was everything I'd planned for and more. But there was still one loose end to tie up. The next morning, I woke to a flood of messages on my phone. Claire, Nicole's more level-headed friend, had sent a string of texts, asking if we could talk. Then there were the missed calls, one from Nicole, another from Lila. I didn't bother answering either. Instead, I focused on Megan's article, which had gone live overnight. The headline was bold and damning. Local entrepreneur exposed as serial fraudster. Victims speak out against Evan Carter. The piece detailed everything, from Evan's fraudulent business dealings to the emotional manipulation he used to charm his victims. Megan had done her job well, and the article was already gaining traction online. The comment section was brutal, filled with people expressing outrage and disbelief. By midday, the story had spread beyond the local scene. News outlets were picking it up, and Evan's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. I knew it wouldn't be long before Nicole showed up. Sure enough, by mid-afternoon, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, she stood there, disheveled and pale. Her makeup was smudged, and her eyes were red, like she'd been crying for hours. "Adrian," she said, her voice shaky. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside, letting her in. She hesitated for a moment before walking into the living room, her movements uncertain, almost hesitant. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the couch. She perched on the edge of the cushion, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I don't even know where to start," she said finally. "How about with the truth?" I replied, leaning back in my chair. "That would be a good place to start, don't you think?" She flinched at the sharpness in my tone but nodded. "I didn't know Evan was. I didn't know he was a criminal. I thought he was. Better than me?" I interrupted. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "That's not what I meant. Isn't it?" I shot back. "You poured water on me in front of him, Nicole. You humiliated me in front of your friends, in front of him. You laughed at me, made me the punchline of your little games. And for what? Because you thought he was better than me. Admit it." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she shook her head. "I was stupid. I made a mistake, Adrian. I see that now. Please, just stop," I said, my voice firm. "You don't get to rewrite history now. You made your choice. You picked him, Nicole. You picked them. And now, you get to live with the consequences." She sat there, sobbing softly, while I watched her crumble. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, sympathy, maybe, but it passed quickly, replaced by the cold satisfaction of knowing she was finally feeling the weight of her actions. "Evan's done," I continued. "His career, his reputation, everything. It's over. And you? You tied yourself to him. So don't come here asking me to fix it." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't soften. "Go home, Nicole," I said, standing and walking to the door. "Figure out your next move. But whatever it is, don't involve me. I'm done cleaning up your messes." She hesitated, her eyes pleading, but when I didn't budge, she stood and walked out. As I closed the door behind her, I felt a sense of closure. The storm I'd endured was over, and while Nicole's life lay in ruins, I was already building something stronger, something better. This time, I was the one in control. When Nicole walked out of my house that day, I thought it might be the last time I'd see her. But the fallout from everything I'd set in motion had a way of creeping back into my life, bringing with it echoes of the chaos I'd left behind. Evan's downfall was swift and brutal. Megan's article had gone viral, dragging every skeleton out of his meticulously curated closet. His fraudulent dealings, his manipulative tactics, the victims he'd left in his wake. It was all laid bare for the world to see. Within days, his business partners distanced themselves, publicly denouncing him to salvage their own reputations. His name was blacklisted in professional circles, his accounts frozen pending investigations. It was as if the man who had strutted through life with smug arrogance had vanished overnight, replaced by a pariah with nowhere to hide. And Nicole? She was caught in the crossfire. It started with whispers. Her friends, the ones who had once laughed with her at my expense, began questioning their loyalty. Lila, ever the opportunist, was the first to jump ship. She distanced herself from Nicole, claiming she'd had no idea about Evan's true nature. Mark, whose silence had always been his way of avoiding responsibility, followed suit. He didn't say much, just stopped returning Nicole's calls and quietly unfriended her on social media. The same friends who had cheered her on were now abandoning her, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Nicole's social circle, once a tight-knit group of enablers, dissolved almost overnight. Claire, the only one who had ever shown a shred of decency, reached out to me. "She's not doing well," Claire said over the phone. "She's lost everything, Adrian. Evan's gone, her friends won't talk to her, and her job's on the line because of all the attention. She's falling apart." I listened silently, letting Claire vent her concern. "She's not asking for your forgiveness," Claire continued. But she wanted me to tell you that she's sorry. For everything. Her words hung in the air, heavy and meaningless. Sorry? Sorry didn't erase what she'd done. Sorry didn't take back the humiliation, the betrayal, the nights I'd spent questioning my worth. I appreciate you telling me, I said finally, my voice flat. But what she feels now doesn't change what happened. Claire sighed. I didn't think it would. I just thought you should know. Nicole's attempts to rebuild her life were met with resistance at every turn. The scandal had tarnished her reputation, and her association with Evan made her a subject of gossip and speculation. People whispered about her at work, casting sideways glances when she walked by. She tried reaching out to me again. Text messages at first, then a call I didn't bother answering. The messages were a mix of apologies and desperate pleas, each one more pathetic than the last. I know I hurt you, Adrian. I was wrong. Please, can we just talk? You don't have to forgive me, but I need to explain. I need you to understand. I deleted each one without responding. She'd had her chance to explain. She'd chosen her path, and now she had to walk it alone. Meanwhile, my own life had taken a turn for the better. With Nicole and her toxic circle out of the picture, I found myself with more clarity, more energy to focus on what truly mattered. Sam and I started hanging out more often, our friendship rekindled by the chaos we'd weathered together. He'd been my rock through all of this, and I owed him more than I could ever repay. You're a free man now, Sam said one evening as we sat on my balcony, beers in hand. What's next? Rebuilding, I said simply. Starting fresh, living my life on my terms. One afternoon, as I sorted through old papers, I came across a wedding photo of Nicole and me. I stared at it for a long moment, memories flashing through my mind. The laughter, the promises, the love that had once felt so real. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel sadness or regret. I felt nothing. I slipped the photo into a box and closed it, sealing that chapter of my life for good. Nicole's world had crumbled, and I had been the architect of her downfall. But I wasn't reveling in it anymore. I was moving on, building something better for myself. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. And as I looked out at the horizon, I realized that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new one. By the time the dust finally settled, I found myself standing in the wreckage of a life I no longer recognized. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel broken. I felt liberated. The weight of Nicole's betrayal, the humiliation, the anger, it had all been stripped away, leaving something clearer, sharper, and stronger in its place. Nicole's downfall was complete. Evan had disappeared, his fraudulent empire crumbling beneath the weight of his lies and Megan's relentless reporting. Nicole's friends, those shallow sycophants who had laughed at my expense, had scattered, each too self-serving to stay loyal when the tide turned. And Nicole? She was a shadow of her former self. The messages stopped coming after a few weeks. Claire told me she had moved back in with her parents, a woman seeking refuge from a world that no longer had space for her arrogance. She was trying to rebuild, but her pleas for forgiveness no longer mattered to me. I had my own rebuilding to do. The first step was reclaiming my space, my home, my time, my mind. I started with the house. Nicole had filled it with trinkets and reminders of her superficial tastes, and I systematically stripped it all away. The living room, once cluttered with throw pillows and abstract art I'd never cared for, became clean and minimalist. The bedroom, which had felt cold and alien for so long, became a sanctuary. Even the kitchen felt different as I rearranged it to suit my needs, not hers. Each change, no matter how small, felt like a step toward reclaiming myself. My next step was reconnecting with the parts of my life that Nicole had slowly eroded. I started spending more time with Sam, whose steady support had been a lifeline through the storm. "You're finally looking like yourself again," he said one night as we grabbed drinks at a local bar. "I feel like myself again," I admitted. Sam raised his glass. "To freedom." "To freedom," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. Work became a source of pride again. Without Nicole's constant criticisms or demands pulling my attention, I threw myself into my projects with a renewed sense of purpose. My focus didn't go unnoticed. Within months, I landed a promotion that had once felt out of reach. The recognition wasn't just professional, it was personal. I had proven to myself that I wasn't defined by Nicole's betrayal or anyone else's opinion of me. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of whiskey, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The humiliation Nicole had subjected me to, the carefully orchestrated revenge I'd enacted, the way their laughter had turned to pleading cries. It had all been necessary. But it wasn't who I was anymore. I didn't feel the need to dwell on Nicole or Evan or any of it. They were part of my story, yes, but they no longer had power over me. I was free of them, free of the pain they'd caused, free to write the next chapter of my life on my terms. I started meeting new people, cautiously at first but with growing confidence. Claire had introduced me to a coworker of hers, a woman named Sophie who was kind, intelligent, and refreshingly genuine. We met for coffee a few times, our conversations flowing easily, unburdened by the past. Sophie wasn't like Nicole. She didn't demand attention or thrive on drama. She was steady, grounded, a reminder that not all connections had to be fraught with betrayal and pain. Whether or not things with Sophie would go anywhere didn't matter. What mattered was that I was open to the possibility of something new, something better. One night, as I closed the door to my newly renovated home, I glanced at the box of memories I'd tucked away in the corner of the closet. The photos, the mementos, the remnants of a life I no longer wanted. They were still there, but they didn't haunt me anymore. I didn't need to burn them or throw them away. They were part of my story, but they didn't define me. As I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I felt a quiet sense of contentment. The life I had now wasn't the one I'd planned, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I was excited to see what came next. Because this time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward, and the future felt brighter than ever. It started like any other Saturday morning, quiet, predictable, and wrapped in the comfort of routine. Saturdays were my time. I could tinker with my old Chevy in the garage, let my mind wander, and lose myself in the satisfaction of fixing something with my hands. That day was no different, or so I thought. The garage smelled of motor oil and degreaser, the kind of mix that might make others wrinkle their noses but felt like home to me. The faint hum of the radio in the background filled the space with soft rock, blending with the rhythmic clink of the wrench as I worked on replacing the brake pads. It was just me, the car, and a few hours of peace. Monica, my wife, poked her head into the garage now and then. "Do you need anything, Lucas?" she'd ask, her voice light and sweet. She always had a mug of tea in her hand, and her perfume, a subtle lavender scent, lingered long after she'd left. She didn't linger much, just enough to offer me a smile, a quick touch on my arm, and a brief conversation before she disappeared back inside. That morning, her energy seemed a little brighter than usual. She was all smiles, floating around the house like she had something to look forward to. "By the way, Nora and I are hosting a small dinner party tonight," she said when she came in again. "Just a few friends, nothing fancy. Can you help me set up later?" Her tone was casual, almost dismissive, as though my answer didn't really matter. I barely looked up from the car. "Sure, just let me know when," I replied, my voice as neutral as my focus on the rusty bolt in front of me. It all seemed so normal. Monica and her best friend Nora had always been social butterflies, arranging get-togethers for their little circle. It wasn't unusual for them to spend hours chatting over wine, swapping stories, and laughing at jokes that I never quite understood. I didn't mind. It gave Monica joy, and that was enough for me. By late morning, the house had transformed. Monica was bustling between the kitchen and living room, setting up candles and wiping down countertops, her movements quick and purposeful. I caught glimpses of her as I passed by, her hair tied back neatly, her face flushed with the effort of her preparations. She looked happy. At least, that's what I told myself. "Don't forget to clean up before the guests arrive," she teased as I walked through the kitchen, my hands still streaked with grease. I gave her a playful smirk. "What? You don't think they'll appreciate the rugged mechanic look?" She laughed, a sound I'd always found comforting. "Not tonight, Lucas. Tonight, we're aiming for classy." Classy. That word stuck with me for some reason. Maybe it was the way she said it, Or maybe it was the way she looked when she said it. Her eyes had this spark, this energy that I hadn't seen in a while. She seemed different, but I shrugged it off. Monica was just excited about the party, I told myself. Nothing unusual about that. The hours slipped by as I finished up in the garage, cleaned myself up, and started helping with the setup. The table was set with our best dishes, the wine glasses polished until they sparkled. Monica had even picked up a new centerpiece, a small bouquet of white roses that added a touch of elegance to the room. "You really went all out this time," I said, setting down the last plate. She smiled, a little too brightly. "It's a special night," she replied, smoothing the fabric of her dress. Something about her tone made me pause, but I shook it off. It was just another Saturday, another dinner party. If only I'd paid more attention to the little details. The spark in her eyes, the way she fussed over her hair and makeup, the slight tremor in her hands as she poured the wine. But I didn't. I let it all slide, dismissing it as excitement. After all, what could possibly go wrong on a calm, ordinary Saturday like this? The doorbell rang at precisely 7 p.m., right on time for Monica's carefully planned dinner party. I was still in the kitchen, finishing up the last of the appetizers she'd asked me to help with, something about needing a masculine touch to the cheese platter. I didn't mind. It was her night, after all, and if slicing cheddar into perfect squares made her happy, so be it. "Can you get that?" Monica called from the living room, her voice light and cheerful. She was already in full hostess mode, flitting around like a butterfly, adjusting candles and double-checking the seating arrangement. I wiped my hands on a towel and headed for the door. Nora, Monica's best friend, was the first to arrive, as usual. She breezed in wearing a dress that looked expensive enough to make me wince, and with her signature air of confidence, she immediately started complimenting everything in sight. "Monica, this is stunning," Nora gushed, her voice dripping with admiration as she took in the table setup. "You've outdone yourself." The others trickled in shortly after, 4 of Monica's colleagues from work, a few plus ones, and then, finally, Caleb. He was the last to arrive, striding in with the kind of confidence that made everyone look twice. Tall, broad-shouldered, and annoyingly charming. He seemed to command the room without even trying. I hadn't met Caleb before, but I'd heard about him. Monica talked about him often. How brilliant he was, how much the company relied on him, how much he had elevated their team. I'd never thought much of it, chalking it up to work admiration. But as I watched him walk in, something about him didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the way his eyes immediately sought Monica out. Maybe it was the easy familiarity in the way they greeted each other, a little too familiar for my liking. "Caleb," Monica said warmly, her face lighting up as she walked over to him. "I'm so glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, flashing a grin that seemed a little too perfect. He handed her a bottle of wine, and their fingers brushed briefly, just long enough for me to notice. I clenched my jaw and turned away, pretending to adjust the platter of appetizers on the table. It wasn't the time or place to start questioning things. This was Monica's night, and I wasn't going to ruin it with my suspicions. Not yet, anyway. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew livelier. Glasses clinked, laughter filled the room, and Monica seemed to be in her element. She floated effortlessly between conversations, her laugh ringing out like music. I tried to join in, to relax and enjoy myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an outsider in my own home. It wasn't just Monica and Caleb. It was the way the entire room seemed to orbit around them. They stood too close, their conversations just a little too hushed. Once, when Caleb leaned in to whisper something to her, she laughed softly, her hand brushing his arm. It was subtle, so subtle that no one else seemed to notice. But I did. By the time we sat down for dinner, my unease had settled into a dull ache in the pit of my stomach. I tried to focus on the conversation, to laugh at the right moments, but my mind kept drifting back to Monica and Caleb. The way she leaned toward him, the way his gaze lingered on her just a little too long. And then it happened. It started as a playful exchange, a harmless joke about my cooking skills. Monica teased me about the cheese platter I'd assembled earlier, and I played along, smiling even as the others laughed. But then Caleb chimed in, making some offhand remark about how Monica always fixes everything. The room erupted in laughter, but I didn't find it funny. Something in his tone, in the way he said her name, set my teeth on edge. I tried to let it slide, but Monica's next words were the tipping point. "Oh, Caleb, don't be so hard on him," she said, smiling. "He tries his best." She meant it as a joke, I'm sure, but the way she said it, the condescension, the little smirk, made my blood boil. Before I could stop myself, I fired back with a joke of my own, something about Caleb's tie being as obnoxious as his laugh. It was petty, I'll admit, but I couldn't help it. The room went quiet for a moment, the tension palpable. And then Monica, my wife, did something I never thought she'd do. She picked up her plate of spaghetti, smiled sweetly, and threw it right at me. The plate hit my chest with a wet splat, spaghetti and sauce flying everywhere. For a moment, no one moved. Then the room erupted in laughter. Loud, raucous laughter. I stood there, frozen, as the sauce dripped down my shirt. Monica was laughing, Caleb was laughing, and so were the rest of them. They weren't laughing with me. They were laughing at me. Something inside me snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. I simply excused myself, wiped the sauce from my face, and walked into the kitchen. I could hear them laughing as I left the room, their voices echoing in my ears like nails on a chalkboard. In that moment, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the dish towel in my hand, the faint smell of marinara sauce clinging to me like a bad memory. The laughter echoed from the dining room, louder now, as though my absence had made me even more of a joke. Each laugh felt like a knife to the back, twisting deeper every second. I should have been furious, maybe even heartbroken, but instead, I felt something else, cold, calculating clarity. It was the kind of calm that comes just before a storm, the moment when you realize you're done being a spectator in your own life. I took a deep breath and wiped my shirt as clean as I could manage. Sauce stains still clung to the fabric, but I didn't care. The damage wasn't just to my clothes. It was to my pride, my dignity, my sense of self. Monica had made sure of that when she decided that I, her husband, was the perfect punchline for her lover and her so-called friends. I glanced at the dining room doorway. From where I stood, I could see Caleb leaning back in his chair, his arms crossed, a smug grin plastered across his face. He wasn't just laughing at me. He was reveling in it, basking in the attention Monica showered on him. And Monica? She was at the center of it all, glowing like the star of some twisted performance. I clenched my fists, the edges of my nails digging into my palms. I wanted to walk back in there, to shout, to demand answers, to throw something right back at her. But that's not who I am. Monica might have thought she'd won tonight, but I was already planning how to take back control. Instead of storming in, I quietly opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and leaned against the counter. I sipped it slowly, letting the cold bitterness settle in my chest. The laughter eventually quieted, replaced by the murmur of casual conversation. I could hear Monica's voice, sweet and melodic, effortlessly charming the group. It sickened me. When I finally walked back into the dining room, I made sure my expression was neutral. If they thought they'd rattled me, they were wrong. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "Well," I said lightly, brushing imaginary crumbs off my shirt, "that's one way to ensure the party is memorable." The room froze for a moment, and then the laughter started again. Caleb clapped me on the shoulder, the audacity of his gesture making my skin crawl. "You're a good sport, man," he said, his voice dripping with false camaraderie. "Not everyone can take a joke like that." I forced a tight smile. "Oh, I can take a joke," I replied, my tone calm. "But you know what they say, sometimes the punchline comes later." The subtle thread in my words seemed to pass over most of them, but not Monica. Her smile faltered for just a second, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. Unease, maybe, or guilt. Whatever it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her usual veneer of charm. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze of forced conversation and polite smiles. I played my part well, nodding and laughing at all the right moments, even as my mind worked overtime. I observed everything. The way Monica and Caleb exchanged subtle glances, the way her hand lingered on his arm for just a second too long, the way he leaned toward her when he thought no one was looking. They were sloppy, the both of them, too comfortable in their deceit to realize they were being watched. As dessert was served, a rich chocolate cake Monica had proudly baked herself, I noticed how Caleb's slice was just a little larger than everyone else's. A small detail, but it spoke volumes. Monica placed his plate in front of him with a smile that was far too intimate, far too familiar. My stomach turned. By the time the guests began to leave, I felt like a volcano ready to erupt. Monica stood at the door, saying her goodbyes, her laughter ringing out as Caleb kissed her cheek before leaving. I stayed in the background, silent and unreadable, watching as she closed the door and leaned against it, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Well," she said, turning to me, "that was a success, don't you think?" I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "Oh, it was definitely memorable," I said, "but let's hope no one chokes on all that laughter." Her brow furrowed, just for a moment, before she shrugged and headed upstairs. "I'm exhausted," she called over her shoulder. "Don't stay up too late." I stood in the empty dining room, staring at the remnants of the evening. The half-empty wine glasses, the crumpled napkins, the plates smeared with sauce and crumbs. It looked like a battlefield, and in many ways, that's exactly what it was. Monica thought she'd won tonight, but she didn't realize the game had just begun. I wasn't going to confront her yet. No, that would be too easy, too impulsive. I needed to bide my time, to gather my ammunition, to make sure that when I finally struck, there would be no escape for her or for Caleb. I began cleaning up the table, my mind racing with possibilities. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my pride, my life. Monica had made her move. Now it was my turn. And when the time came, I'd make sure it was a moment she, and everyone else in that room, would never forget. The house was eerily quiet after the last guest left, the kind of silence that forces you to confront your thoughts whether you want to or not. I stood in the dining room, the faint smell of red wine and marinara sauce hanging in the air. The mess from the evening surrounded me, crumpled napkins, lipstick-stained wine glasses, and scattered breadcrumbs. But my mind was elsewhere. Monica had gone upstairs, humming softly to herself as though the night had been a complete success. I could still hear her faint footsteps above me, moving toward our bedroom, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in my head. I grabbed a glass of water and sat at the table, staring at the empty chair where Caleb had been sitting earlier. His smug grin was seared into my memory, a reminder of everything I'd ignored for far too long. Tonight had been the tipping point. That plate of spaghetti wasn't just food thrown in anger. It was a declaration, a challenge, a dare. She thought I'd take it, that I'd laugh it off and continue being the silent fool. But she was wrong. The funny thing about betrayal is that it sharpens you. Every word, every glance, every detail starts to take on new meaning. Sitting there at that table, I began piecing it all together. The late nights at work, the polished excuses, the overly familiar way Caleb had looked at her tonight. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was truth. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. Instead, a cold clarity washed over me, like stepping into icy water. Revenge isn't about anger. It's about precision, about control. I wasn't going to scream or confront her tonight. No, that's what she'd expect. She'd prepared for that, rehearsed the lies, smoothed the edges of her excuses. But what she hadn't prepared for was me staying calm. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing as I began to plan. This wasn't going to be an emotional outburst. It was going to be methodical, calculated, undeniable. Monica had turned tonight into her moment of triumph. But what she didn't know was that I had already started laying the groundwork for her downfall weeks ago. It started small, an observation here, a question there. I'd noticed the way she smiled when Caleb's name came up in conversation, the way she seemed to light up when talking about her team meetings. At first, I'd brushed it off, chalking it up to work stress or a newfound enthusiasm for her job. But the inconsistencies started piling up. The late-night texts she claimed were from Nora. The gym sessions that seemed to last longer than humanly possible. The perfume she wore to meetings that seemed a little too extravagant for business. Tonight, though, was the confirmation I needed. The way she and Caleb interacted wasn't just friendly. It was intimate, familiar. Their glances, their touches, even the way she laughed at his jokes, it was all too much. And then there was the spaghetti. That damn plate of spaghetti. It wasn't just an insult. It was a signal. She thought I was weak, that I wouldn't fight back. But she underestimated me. I stood up and began clearing the table, moving slowly, deliberately. The clinking of dishes was the only sound in the room. I felt strangely calm, almost detached, as I rinsed the plates and loaded them into the dishwasher. My movements were automatic. My mind focused entirely on what needed to be done. The first step was simple: gather evidence. If Monica was going to betray me, I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof that would leave no room for doubt. I wasn't going to confront her with half-baked suspicions or circumstantial nonsense. No, I wanted the truth laid bare, every sordid detail exposed. I already had some pieces of the puzzle. The late nights, the whispered phone calls, and now, tonight's performance. But I needed more. Messages, photos, anything that could connect the dots. That meant playing the long game, keeping my suspicions to myself while I quietly uncovered the truth. After finishing the dishes, I grabbed a notebook from the drawer and started jotting down everything I could remember from the night. Caleb's offhand comments. Monica's nervous laugh when I'd mentioned the party being memorable. The way she'd hovered around him, her hand brushing his arm as though she couldn't help herself. I wrote it all down, each detail sharpening my resolve. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about reclaiming the respect she'd stripped away from me tonight. When the kitchen was spotless, I turned off the lights and headed upstairs. Monica was already asleep, her breathing soft and steady. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. She looked peaceful, innocent even. It would have been easy to believe this was the same woman I'd married all those years ago, the woman I thought I knew. But I wasn't that naive anymore. I climbed into bed beside her, careful not to wake her. As I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my plan began to take shape. This wasn't going to be a quick, impulsive act of vengeance. It was going to be thorough, meticulous, and unforgettable. Monica had made her move. Now it was my turn. And when the time came, I wouldn't just expose her betrayal. I'd make sure she felt the weight of every choice she'd made, every lie she told, every laugh she'd shared at my expense. The cracks in our marriage had been forming for months, maybe even years. Tonight, they turned into a chasm. And soon, I was going to bring the entire facade crashing down. The morning after the party, the house was unnervingly still. Monica was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared her usual green smoothie, completely oblivious to the growing storm in my head. I sat at the table, nursing a cup of coffee, watching her as though I were observing a stranger. Everything about her seemed calculated now. The precise way she measured the spinach, the way her smile flickered on and off, almost like a mask. "How are you feeling this morning?" she asked, glancing at me over her shoulder. I forced a smile. "Fine. Tired, maybe." My voice was even, neutral. No emotion. She didn't notice, of course. Why would she? She thought she had me figured out, thought I was still the clueless husband she could laugh at with her lover and friends. But today wasn't just another day. Today was the beginning. After she left for her work meeting later that morning, I got to work. If I was going to expose Monica and Caleb, I needed evidence. Undeniable, unshakable evidence. And I wasn't going to wait for it to fall into my lap. The first step was setting up a tracker. I had a small GPS device tucked away in a drawer in the garage, something I'd bought for road trips but had never gotten around to using. It was tiny, discreet, and perfect for my needs. I slipped it into the trunk of her car, hidden under the carpet where it would be practically invisible. Next, I needed a way to monitor her phone. I'd read enough articles and seen enough news stories to know that technology could be my greatest ally. I downloaded software that would sync her texts and call logs to a cloud account. It wasn't legal, but I wasn't exactly concerned about the morality of it. She had thrown that out the window when she decided to betray me. By the time Monica returned home that afternoon, everything was in place. She breezed through the door, all smiles and lightness, as though she didn't have a care in the world. "How was your day?" she asked, leaning down to kiss me on the cheek. "It was fine," I replied, my tone as casual as hers. "Got a lot done around the house." She didn't press further, didn't even notice the faint tension in my voice. She was too busy scrolling through her phone, her face glowing with the kind of contentment that made me sick to my stomach. I wondered if she was texting Caleb right then, laughing about last night about me. That evening, while Monica watched TV, I reviewed the first batch of data from her phone. Most of it was mundane. Text with Nora about yoga classes, emails from her boss. But then I found it. A text chain with Caleb, buried under a generic name, James. I clicked on it, my heart pounding. "Caleb, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." "Monica, it was perfect. You're perfect." "Caleb, I can't wait until Friday. Just us, no interruptions." "Monica, room 213 is ours. I'll bring the wine." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. There it was, in black and white. The lies, the betrayal, the sheer audacity. My hands shook as I read the messages again, each one burning itself into my mind. I saved screenshots of the texts and stored them in a secure folder. This was only the beginning. The GPS tracker showed that her car had been at a luxury hotel the night before the party, the same hotel mentioned in the texts. Room 213. I stared at the screen, the little blinking dot marking her every move. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life. But it wasn't. It was mine. That night, as we lay in bed, Monica drifted off to sleep within minutes, her breathing soft and steady. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. The texts, the hotel visit, the lingering glances with Caleb. They were all pieces of a puzzle I was determined to complete. But I wasn't going to rush. No, I needed this to be perfect. If I confronted her too soon, she'd deny everything, spin the story, turn it back on me. I'd seen it happen to others, men who acted on suspicion and ended up looking like paranoid fools. That wasn't going to be me. Instead, I planned my next move. The text had given me a date, Friday. I didn't need to guess or speculate. They were planning to meet again, and I wasn't going to let the opportunity slip through my fingers. I'd already started gathering evidence, but Friday would be the clincher. As I lay there, a strange sense of calm washed over me. Monica thought she was in control, thought she could keep her secrets hidden, but she didn't realize she'd already lost. Every lie, every betrayal, every cruel laugh at my expense. It was all building toward a moment she wouldn't see coming. And when that moment came, when I laid everything out in front of her, she wouldn't just feel regret. She'd feel devastation. Friday arrived like a slow-burning fuse, ticking down to an explosion only I could see coming. Monica was unusually radiant that morning, her smile brighter, her movements more purposeful. She floated around the house like she was weightless, humming softly as she packed her things for work. I played along, pretending not to notice the extra time she spent on her makeup or the way she double-checked her bag before leaving. "Big day at work?" I asked casually as I sipped my coffee. She paused for a moment, her back to me, then turned with that practiced smile I'd grown to resent. "Just the usual," she said, her tone breezy. "Meetings, deadlines, you know how it is." I nodded, hiding the satisfaction bubbling just beneath the surface. I didn't know how it was, better than she realized. By the time Monica left the house, I was already in action. I checked the GPS tracker on her car, watching the blinking as it made its way across town. It stopped briefly at the office, just long enough to keep up appearances, before continuing to the hotel. Room 213. The text had been painfully accurate. I wasn't far behind. I parked a few blocks away, my car tucked discreetly out of view. From the glove compartment, I retrieved a small black duffel bag containing everything I'd prepared: a voice recorder, my phone for photos, and a printed stack of the evidence I'd already gathered. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was an unveiling, a performance that would leave no room for doubt. The lobby of the hotel was busy but not chaotic. Business travelers, tourists, and couples streamed in and out, oblivious to the drama about to unfold. I kept my head down, moving purposefully toward the elevator. My hands were steady, my heart cold. This wasn't anger anymore. It was strategy. I reached the second floor and walked quietly down the hallway. Room 213 was at the end, the door closed, a silent barrier between me and the truth. For a moment, I stood there, staring at the polished brass numbers. I could hear faint voices on the other side. Laughter, murmured conversation. It made my stomach turn. I slipped the voice recorder into my pocket, turned on my phone's camera, and knocked. The laughter stopped. A moment later, the door opened, and there she was, Monica, her expression shifting from surprise to horror in the span of a heartbeat. She stood frozen in the doorway, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. "Lucas," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I stepped past her into the room, my gaze sweeping over the scene. Caleb was sitting on the edge of the bed, his shirt unbuttoned, a glass of wine in his hand. He looked up at me, his smug expression faltering as realization dawned. "Well, don't let me interrupt," I said, my voice calm but cold. "It looks like you two were having a great time." Monica closed the door behind me, her hands trembling. "Lucas, this isn't what it looks like." "Don't," I cut her off sharply, holding up a hand. "Don't insult me by pretending this is something it's not. I've been watching, Monica. I know everything." I pulled the stack of papers from my bag and tossed them onto the bed. Caleb flinched as they scattered around him. Screenshots of texts, GPS logs, photos. Every lie, every betrayal, laid out in black and white. "Room 213, I said, my voice dripping with disdain. "You didn't even bother to change the details in your messages. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Or did you think I was too stupid to care?" Monica's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I never meant for it to get this far." I turned to Caleb, who was now standing, his hands raised defensively. "And you?" I said, my tone hardening. "The big shot boss. Was it worth it? Throwing away your career, your reputation, all for this?" Caleb opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I pulled my phone from my pocket and snapped a photo of them standing there together. Monica in tears, Caleb looking guilty and disheveled. The flash lit up the room, capturing the moment in stark, undeniable detail. "You can explain this to HR on Monday," I said, pocketing the phone. "I've already sent everything to your company's board of directors. Let's see how they feel about their golden boy now." Caleb's face turned pale, and he stammered something about it being a mistake, but I wasn't listening. I was done with him. I turned back to Monica. "You destroyed us," I said quietly. "You laughed at me, humiliated me, betrayed me. And for what? A man who's going to lose everything because of you?" She fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, Lucas," she begged. "Give me another chance. I'll do anything." I looked at her, my expression unreadable. "I gave you everything, Monica, and you threw it away. Now you'll have to live with the consequences." Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving them to deal with the wreckage of their choices. As I stepped into the elevator, I felt a strange sense of calm. The chaos was over, but for Monica and Caleb, it was just beginning. The drive home was eerily quiet, the weight of what had just transpired settling over me like a heavy fog. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white as I replayed the confrontation in my mind. Monica's tear-streaked face, Caleb's pale, panicked expression. It was everything I'd imagined and more. But the satisfaction I thought I'd feel was fleeting. There was still more to be done. I parked in the driveway, stepping into the house that now felt more like a battlefield than a home. The mess from the dinner party earlier in the week was long gone, replaced with a chilling sterility. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. And I already knew what that move would be. The evidence I'd gathered wasn't just for Caleb's employer. It was for Monica's carefully constructed life, too. She had spent years cultivating a reputation among her friends, colleagues, and community as the perfect wife, the charming hostess, the ambitious professional. But now, I was about to rip that facade apart piece by piece. I walked to the living room and powered on the TV. The flash drive containing everything, the texts, the photos, the voice recordings, was in my pocket. My hands were steady as I inserted it into the USB port and queued up the slideshow. The first image appeared on the screen. Monica's text exchange with Caleb, their flirtatious banter laced with betrayal. It wasn't just for me anymore. This wasn't about personal revenge. It was about exposing the truth to everyone who thought they knew her. By the time Monica's car pulled into the driveway, I was ready. She entered the house hesitantly, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She stopped when she saw me standing in the living room, the TV glowing behind me like an ominous beacon. "Lucas," she began, her voice trembling. "Sit down," I said, my tone cold and commanding. She hesitated but complied, sinking into the couch like a prisoner awaiting their sentence. "You think I don't know you, Monica?" I asked, pacing slowly in front of her. "You think I'm blind? That I've been deaf to your lies?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Don't. Just watch." I picked up the remote and clicked the play button. The first slide appeared on the screen. A photo of her car parked outside the hotel, the timestamp clearly visible in the corner. Her face went pale. The next slide showed the texts. "Caleb, room 213 is ours. Monica, I can't wait." She covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. "Lucas, please." I ignored her, advancing to the next piece of evidence. The audio recording played next, Caleb's voice echoing through the room. "You make me feel alive, Monica." Her reply followed, the words cutting like knives. "Lucas doesn't see me anymore. I feel invisible with him." The silence that followed was deafening. Monica buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I stood there, unmoving, watching as the woman I thought I knew unraveled before me. "You destroyed us," I said finally, my voice low but firm. "You laughed at me in front of your lover, in front of your friends. You humiliated me. And now, everyone will see the truth." Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. "What do you mean?" I gestured to the flash drive. "This isn't just for you. It's for them. Caleb's boss has already seen it. Your friends will, too. They'll know who you really are, Monica. The lies, the betrayal. It's all coming out." She shook her head violently. "You can't. Please, Lucas, don't do this. We can fix this. I'll end it with Caleb, I swear." I laughed bitterly, cutting her off. "Fix it? You think this is something you can patch up with an apology? You've made your choices, Monica. Now you'll face the consequences." I turned off the TV and walked to the door, grabbing my keys. "I'm staying at a hotel tonight," I said, my voice cold. "Don't call me. Don't text me. You'll hear from my lawyer soon." As I walked out, her sobs followed me, but I didn't look back. The truth was out, and there was no undoing it. Monica's perfect world had been shattered, and I had no intention of helping her pick up the pieces. When I woke the next morning in a hotel room that wasn't mine, there was no relief, no solace in the sunlight streaming through the curtains. The events of the previous day played on a loop in my mind, each scene more vivid than the last. Monica's sobs, the panic in her voice, the devastation on her face as her lies came crashing down. But instead of pity, all I felt was resolve. This wasn't over, not yet. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Andrew Phillips. Andrew was sharp, relentless, and known for his ability to turn even the most hopeless cases into victories. I explained everything: Monica's betrayal, the evidence I'd gathered, the humiliation I'd endured. He listened quietly, only interrupting to ask clarifying questions. "Lucas," he said finally, his tone calm but firm, "you're in a strong position here. The evidence is airtight, and in this state, adultery is still a significant factor in divorce proceedings. If we play this right, you'll walk away with everything." "Everything?" I echoed, the word heavy in my mouth. "Everything," he confirmed. "The house, the assets, even spousal support if you want it. She'll be left with nothing but regret." I hung up the phone feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. Monica had made her choices, and now it was time for her to face the fallout. When I arrived back at the house that afternoon, the air was thick with tension. Monica was sitting on the couch, her eyes swollen and red, clutching a tissue in her hand. She looked up as I walked in, her face a mix of hope and fear. "Lucas," she began, her voice trembling, "can we talk? Please." I didn't answer immediately. I set my keys down on the table and stood there, staring at her. For a moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago, the woman I had built a life with. But that image was shattered by the memory of her betrayal. "There's nothing to talk about," I said finally, my tone cold. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. You'll be hearing from him soon." Her face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Lucas, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over." I cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Start over? Monica, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice to betray me, to humiliate me in front of your lover and your friends. And now you want forgiveness? It's too late." She tried to reach for me, but I stepped back, the space between us feeling like a chasm. "Lucas, please," she begged. "I'll do anything. Just don't give up on us." I shook my head, the weight of her words barely registering. "You gave up on us the moment you let him into our life. This isn't something you can fix with an apology, Monica. This is the end." Over the next few days, the consequences of her actions began to ripple outward. The evidence I'd sent to Caleb's company had reached their board of directors. I received an email from an anonymous source, likely someone in HR, confirming that Caleb had been terminated effective immediately. His reputation was in ruins, his career over. Monica didn't fare much better. Though she hadn't been fired outright, she was placed on indefinite suspension, pending an internal investigation. Her colleagues began to distance themselves, whispers of her affair spreading through the office like wildfire. The polished image she had worked so hard to cultivate was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Our friends, too, began to take sides. Those who had been at the party, who had laughed at my expense, were the first to disappear. Others reached out to express their shock and sympathy, though their words rang hollow. I didn't need their pity. I needed closure. One evening, Monica approached me in the kitchen, her movements tentative, her eyes downcast. She placed a manila envelope on the counter. "What's this?" I asked, not bothering to hide my annoyance. "It's everything," she said softly. "Bank statements, account passwords, the deeds to the house. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to make this as easy as possible. You can have it all." I stared at her, searching her face for some sign of sincerity. For once, there was no mask, no pretense. Just a broken woman trying to salvage the last shreds of her dignity. "Thank you," I said simply, taking the envelope. She nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. As she turned to leave, I stopped her. "Monica." She froze, her back to me. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for," I said. "But it won't be here." She didn't respond. She just walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty house. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the stack of papers she had given me. The house was mine. The accounts were secure, and the legal battle was all but won. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger or resolve. I felt the weight of loss. The loss of the woman I had loved, the life we had built, and the future we had once dreamed of. But as I sat there, I realized something else. I was free. Free to rebuild, to start over, to create a life that wasn't defined by betrayal. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope.